And the impacts of this are huge, not just for performance, but on a cellular mitochondrial level, but for longevity. I mean, the longevity thing, the more you're in beta oxidation, which is the true fat burning state, ketosis is actually a byproduct. It's a proxy because you can measure it. But the more you're in that fat burning state, the less oxidative stress, the less lactate load, the more your body's processing cholesterol for what it needs to be done, because cholesterol's the building block for our entire cells. You know, it carries the proteins, it carries all those fatty acids. The more robust you are, and I think that's where the real impact for longevity and reversing chronic diseases or preventing them comes from. And then the other little thing as we close this out that I want to repeat to people going into winter, and you know this as well as I do, is just preventing the common cold, the influenza. I'll go to a very basic part of virology that people have forgotten, but it's just basic and nobody even argues about it. And virologists won't argue about this because it's established science. It's that viral strands replicate glycolytically, which means your cells have to be metabolizing glucose to cause viral replication. And this is why the studies are showing that people who are fat burners aren't as impacted. And that's why, you know, like you probably noticed since you got fat adapted, you just don't get sick in the winter, right?
Yeah. I mean, I do every once in a while, but usually it's because I'm training. And so your immune system's knocked down a little bit. But I even notice it like with my family, because I have 3 kids, like it'll go through my family and sometimes I won't even get it.
Yeah.
You know, especially if I'm and if it's going through my house, I'm like, especially since COVID, I'm just more educated on like the viral replication process, you know? And so like, I'm more conscious of it. Like when I see who's getting sick, I'm like, you know, I'm using that clear, which is like that xylitol, you know, like nasal spray. I'm using that to clean my nasal passages out because that's where your first replication starts, is in your nasal and back of your throat. So like I'm cleaning that stuff out, right? That's some of the work that Dr. Peter McCullough has been doing and showing that like if you just do that, right, when you know you've been in contact with that's sick. The other is just, you know, I always go really low carb and higher protein, low carb during, even if I'm in hard training, I'll just go take my protein higher during that when there's something going around in my house. So that way I know that the body's going to have a harder time, or that virus is going to have a harder time getting a foothold because it doesn't have a lot of glucose to feed on.
Yeah, it doesn't have the environment. That's the thing. If your cells are burning sugar, you're inviting them in to have a replicating orgy, literally.
Yeah.
And when they're burning fat, it's like this is a hostile environment for viral replication.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And that's the thing, when you're run down, fatigued, some sort of chronic stress, of course, that triggers more cortisol, which triggers more sugar burn, which is going to facilitate viral replication. That is a good time to be discussed right now as we go into winter, you know, keep your vitamin D up, do proper supplementation. Like you say, you do the xylitol. If you get cold, take a hot Epsom salt bath, keep your magnesium up, zinc, you know, but this is
there's actually a great dark horse podcast, Brett Weinstein's podcast. There's a great dark horse podcast on vitamin D. I think he did it last year he interviewed 2 vitamin D researchers, really interesting on vitamin D supplementation and health, really, especially when it comes to viruses. So really interesting podcast if anybody's interested in kind of going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, as you know, that was one of the first things I had you do the vitamin D protocol I developed back in 2008 or 9. And I did a lot of research reading Michael Hollick and some others. Michael Hollick's like the foremost researcher in vitamin D. And it was like, you know, unless you're doing something really proactive, you're suboptimal and probably deficient, you know?
Yeah, especially if you're inside. You know, if you're inside most of the day, I mean, because you really only get vitamin D absorption when your shadow is shorter than your height. So if it's late in the afternoon or early in the morning, you're really not, even if you had skin showing, you're really not getting that much vitamin D absorption. It has to be kind of
and you have to have your clothes off, right? You have to have a lot of skin showing, and you have to have it midday. And then, when you live above the latitude of like Monterey, California, Santa Cruz, Monterey, you don't get vitamin UVB this time of year. People just
No,
don't
from
know
like,
that stuff.
yeah, you don't get any. You get
Yeah.
nothing for like 6 months of the year. So
Yeah.
you have to do some kind of supplementation. We just aren't outside as much as we used to as humans. So and we cover up. So we just don't get the absorption anymore. So it's like, I think that's a really important, and this is where it comes back to like liver and all kinds of stuff, right? Because it's high in vitamin K.
You need to take the vitamin D with liver for the vitamin A, vitamin B, and the vitamin K2 that's in liver. And then you also need magnesium because our diet's pretty poor in magnesium these days.